Welcome to Music Matters Podcast with Darrell Craig Harris, talking about all things music with celebrities, artists, music business insiders, and more. Hi, guys. Welcome to Music Matters, a podcast series about all things music. Today, we have an awesome guest, Kevin Magowan. Kevin is a singer-songwriter, had a long history with music licensing and music clearance in Los Angeles, which is a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Hi, Kevin. How you doing?
I'm fabulous. How are you? Happy New Year, Darrell.
Hey, you too, man. Yeah, we're just getting started. Let's hope this year goes a little bit better than last year.
Here comes the sun in 2021. That's what I say.
Exactly. So you grew up in Vegas. Is that correct?
Yes, I was born here and raised in Las Vegas. Grew up around the Boulevard Mall, if you know where that is. And,
oh, yeah.
My mother was a prominent person in town. She was the vice president of Dunes Hotel in public relations and advertising up on the Strip. And her boyfriend, Tony Zoppi, worked as the entertainment director at the Riviera. So they had a lot going on up there on the Strip. So I grew up with that in mind. And then for me, on February 7, 1964, when I was 7 years old, I was one of the 73 million people that saw the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
And everything went from black and white to color, as they say. And I was a little boy. And I'll just be honest, I didn't have a father growing up. My mother divorced and never remarried. So I figured this out like I was in my 40s, like, what's up with this Beatle thing that changed my life and put me on a path. And I think it was that there were these four guys, not one, but four of them, that were just so joyful in a unit, that were conquering the world with music. And I looked up to them as father figures. And I was always known as the Beatle freak in Las Vegas when I was growing up. And I always said, Beatles forever, they'll always be the best. And that's what I thought, but I didn't know that 50-something years later would be true. But that's still my opinion, but I think it's true. The Beatles were a gift from the universe. So that's what happened for me. Growing up here in Las Vegas, I was in bands, played at Valley High and William Moore, and was singing and playing drums and getting always around music. So,
right. Yeah. I mean, the Beatles thing, like that definitely was a earth-shattering change in the music world, right? And that they inspired so many people that we now know that are household names.
Well, it was a time where, it only lasted like 8 years, but it was understood around the world in one unit way that these guys, as John Lennon used to say, were in the crow's nest on the ship, pointing the direction of pop culture and intellectual thinking and songwriting and recording technology and just fashion. And it was all with these guys for that short period of time. And everyone just looked so forward to their next release. And they changed so fast and innovated so much. It was to be like with Bob Dylan and the Rolling Stones and Jimi Hendrix. A lot of stuff, and the civil rights and all these things that were going on in America at the time.
Yeah.
And, I'm older now, but that's one thing I don't mind being older, because I experienced that when I was young. Basically, I was what's called a teen bopper when I was growing up, and that was happening because I wasn't even quite a teenager. I was 11, 12, 13, and then they broke up.
Right, yeah. Because people don't realize actually that really wasn't that long of a time that they were together. It was, you said 8 years, but I mean that changed the world, right?
It did, and people take 8 years to make their next album. They made so many albums and singles, and so much happened. And so I was exposed to a lot at a young age, and I really studied it and was interested in it, and gave my identity to me.
Yeah. So how did you ended up in Los Angeles working for some large music licensing, music clearance firms? How did you end up in LA, and how did you get hooked up? I know there was a legendary guy that you worked with. That's part of your bio.
When I graduated Valley High School, I went to Pepperdine in Malibu. So I was here in the desert, and all of a sudden I found myself looking over the Pacific Ocean up in Malibu, like, wow. So I had a radio show there, and I was starting to write those songs. And what happened was there's a man named Al Gallico who lived in New York, And
Oh,
he
okay.
was an independent music publisher. And he started back in the 40s in the big band era. And he was
Hmm.
by himself. He's actually started with Shapiro Bernstein and Leeds Music. Then he
Yeah,
went out
all
on
the New
his
York
own,
guys, right?
the New York guys and all that brill building and big band stuff. And then he started his own company. And his first hit was the domestic rights for House of the Rising Sun.
Wow.
So he started as a publisher. And then he wanted to come to California because the weather's nice. He had a family. So he had an office. He moved out on the corner of Sunset and Vine, right there in
Oh,
Hollywood.
yeah. Yep.
And he knew my mother and my mother's boyfriend because he loved to gamble. So he'd come to Vegas. And so
Okay.
when he moved out to LA, he said, I'd like some kid that I could teach the business to and run the office. So I quit college after 1 year at Pepperdine because back in the 70s, you didn't need a degree as much to get things. It's like I'm thinking music business. You just get out in the music business, get on the street and get
Yeah, unless you're in the
experience.
a corporate end of it, it's basically
Get out. It was like that. And this guy was a big dude. So, he came out and I started working in the office. And what was interesting with him is he was from New York, but he went down to Nashville and discovered a couple of guys, Billy Sherrill and Nora Wilson,
right.
Jerry Kennedy. And he actually was an independent publisher that published Stand By Your Man and The Most Beautiful Girl and Let Me Be There and all these
huge songs.
Huge standard copyright songs. But at the time, as a teenager, I started when I was 19. I was thrilled to be in Hollywood and in this industry. But I would hear these songs that he was publishing, these country songs, and they were so serious and depressing and, break up marriages and people killing themselves.
Yeah,
I'm like,
but those songs made a lot of money.
What's this twangy shit going on? So, but then later on, as you get older, and I really love country music now and appreciate it. I understand. It just takes more maturing and living life to understand those life lessons.
It's a big leap from the Beatles to some of those artists.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, from rock and roll. But we'll talk about that because good rock and roll has country in it.
Yeah, and that's actually the roots are right there, right? With Carl Perkins, all those guys. Yep.
Oh, they're one of my favorites, the rockabilly thing. So I worked with Al for about 10 years and learned a lot. We were called song pluggers. I would find material and try to get Engelbert Humperdinck or Barry Manilow or Olivia Newton-John or somebody like that to record it that did not write their own songs.
Right, because a lot of those guys didn't write their own songs.
They didn't write their own songs. Now everybody says they write their own songs, even if they just went, hey, they get their name,
they get their name added to the credits. Yeah, I know.
Yeah, get on that. It's smart, I guess.
So part of the reason, there's a lot of reasons with you why I wanted to have you on, but one of the big ones was there's a lot of misconception, a lot of confusion around the whole subject of music licensing, music clearance, what that is, how that works. So what are some of the common misconceptions that you think as far as obviously, and those are different things. So let's start with that, the difference between licensing and clearance.
What we're talking about here is intellectual property and controlling and exploiting copyrights, intellectual property. When you write a song, if you are not signed to anybody and you're by yourself, let's say you just get into business, you own what's called the publishing and the writers. Right there. So all of that is yours. The writer's point, let's say you wrote it by
it's yours until you give it away or
yeah.
But to begin with, yeah.
It's nice because you have a pie here and you can split the pie 50-50. But if you're the sole writer, you have what's called 100% of the writer and 100% of the publishing. Now the writer's share, you should not mess with that. You should keep that, although people are changing that and they're actually selling the writer's rights, which is not healthy, but like Willie Nelson had to do that back in the day when he needed money.
The tax issue.
To make some money to buy another drink. But anyway, the publishing is what you have, this other portion of the pie that you can negotiate with. So if you write the song, you own it 100%, and somebody likes it, you can negotiate and say, well, okay, I'll give you 50% of the publishing, I could keep 50%. Or some people go, no, I want 100% of the publishing. So you have this thing that's a wonderful thing to be able to negotiate with and go forward and have a career. So what happens after I left Algalico, I worked for Walt Disney Studios for 13 years. And I
Wow.
was in the theatrical marketing department. And that's the department that created the trailers and TV commercials
Right.
for the movies.
Which
So
is
we would get,
a big deal with Disney for
oh,
sure.
that's the
Yeah. Yeah.
marketing of the film. So we would get the first cut of the film in, and we'd look at it and go, this is not very good, but our job is to shine this poop and make it look good.
Right.
So in 2 minutes, you make people want to come in and see it. So we would use songs and score cues in these trailers to help sell the visual. What's happening here is a thing called synchronization rights.
Okay.
And that's part of publishing that you can do well with. Synchronization, the concept of synchronization is when you sync or link up an audio to a visual image,
Right.
you need to first of all get permission.
Oh, I lost you. Oh, you broke up a little bit there.
Yeah, I'm just saying is you have to get permission to
Right.
use these audio recordings to a visual image. So you have to find out who controls it. The publishing for the song and the recording is the record company. And it's not just about money. It's about getting the permission and then making a deal and
Right.
letting the people know what you want to do with
Yeah,
their
because I mean,
copyright.
yeah, and because obviously, if you don't get permission, you're opening yourself up for lawsuits. You may put out a
Absolutely.
product that you're going to have to pull from the market.
It's against the law,
Right.
That's just, and you need to know that there's an opportunity there to get what you want done. And to, before you shoot a scene with the song married to the scene, don't do that. Find
Right.
out if you can use the song. And then once you do have permission, then you go shoot the scene. I've had to tell producers, look, you got to pull that song out of there. And it's very costly to do that.
Yeah.
So what I was saying is that you go to the publisher for the song and the record company for the recording of the song.
Mhm.
And there's a process in doing that. That's the music clearance part. The licensing comes later, after the song is used. And some people go, well, no, I want the license before it's even used. No, you wait till it airs or it's going to be released and it's locked. So you know that nothing changes.
Yeah,
Because
that's been a long established process for, especially for television and film, right? That's something that's
Yes.
already set in stone, pretty much.
Yeah, when I was at Disney, I worked on films. And then when I left Disney, I went with a company called EMG, which is the best music clearance company in town, for sure.
Yeah.
Evan M. Greenspan is the guru. It's his company. And I was with him for, I guess, 16 years or so. And we did mostly television shows. So we cleared the Emmys and the Oscars and the Grammys and the Billboard Awards and the iHeart Music Awards.
Yeah, that's a big job, right?
Oh, it's so busy and crazy. And that was a whole other thing about music. And I'd like to talk more about that because I guess that's the most recent thing I did.
Sure.
And what happens is we have clients. We are the people in between the client who's producing the show and the music publisher record company. So we're the middle guy. So our client comes to us and let's say they're producing the Grammy Awards. And what we have to do first of all is find out what rights they want for the show, the Grammy Awards. Is it US and Canada for 2 years, or is it the world for 5 years? Or is it what's called in perpetuity forever?
And that's a whole, those are all different rate structures, right? What they're going to have to pay.
Yes. And what you want to do is get that understanding very locked in with your producer before you what's called send out a request, which is knocking on the door to the publishers and the record companies.
Right.
You submit a request, and this request tells what the show is about, and it tells what song you want to use and the writers on the song and the publishers and co-publishers. And there's usually a synopsis of the use of the song. This is a visual vocal, and so will be singing it up to 1 minute. Or if it's, let's say, a background vocal, up to 30 seconds. The fees are structured and laid out differently. And we propose fees. We go in and propose fees to the publishers. And we need to know if it's for the world, for how long. And the thing is, once you do this, you want to make sure that that's all in place. So you don't have to go back later and go, oh, well, we don't want that anymore. We want to do that. Because once you send this, I used to send out like 2,000 requests for different shows.
Wow.
And then you've got to really have that all mapped out. So you want to get that done. And one thing that we would do is, because these fees are proposed, we would go to the top busy publishers that own most of the catalogs.
Yeah, just make it simple, right? Or simple as.
Yeah, right. Get a real temperature about the reality of how this is going to go based on the show, how popular it is, and that kind of thing. So we would go to Universal Music, B&G Music, Sony, ATV, and Warner Chappell.
All the big guys, yeah.
The big guys, and we would get a consensus. We would propose fees for these uses. And then there's a thing called, this is a big point in the music business, there's a thing called Most Favored Nations, which in parentheses is MFN. Most Favored Nations means, let's say we propose $1,000 for a use. And this one publisher says, no, I really want $2,000.
Right.
And we go, well, you know, these other people over here all agreed to the $1,000.
Yeah.
And if you don't, we might not be able to use your song.
Because I
we
mean,
have
they
a budget.
Right. And they do want their songs used. It's just figuring out the right.
They do.
Yeah.
They do, but there's a budget. So then what they would do, they would say, okay, we'll approve this MFN, meaning if some other publisher just changes their mind and says, we want $1,250. And then I have to go back to the producers and say, these guys won't budge, but at least it's not $2,000, it's $1,250. That's better.
Right.
So the one over here that said $2,000, they know and can trust that they're also going to get $1,250. So when they approve something, they put MFN co-publishers, they could say MFN record company master, that's the master. Or they could say MFN all songs in an episode. So they're protecting themselves without having to really get in there and beat everybody up and find out what's going on. They just say MFN.
Because the thing is, I mean, for the labels and obviously for the artists, if they've retained, hopefully they've retained some of their percentage, that is the money, right? Unless, I mean, as an artist, you know, a lot of people don't really understand that world. A lot of people, we've all heard the stories of people giving away their publishing rights, and they don't understand that's the money. That's the money when you don't want to go on the road anymore. That's the mailbox money.
Well, that's right? I call it the real estate of the music business. Yeah. It all starts with a song, thank God, and it still takes people and their hearts and mind and soul to create a song. And then there's the recording of the song. But human beings still write songs. So that's the real estate, is the publishing. Now, just in the last 2 months, I don't know if you know, but people like Bob Dylan and Stevie Nicks.
Yeah, they've been selling.
Lindsey Buckingham. Yesterday, Neil Young announced that he sold his publishing.
Yeah, I've been seeing that. Is there a particular reason why you think that's happening right now? These guys are all, okay.
I do. I think there's a few reasons. I think one is they're getting older.
Right.
And they're like, they have their families. And
they kind of want to cash out.
They're cashing out. Two is that they haven't been on the road now. Since this pandemic,
right.
They're not making a living on the road, right? And they want to find somebody that can protect their copyrights. So they're working with people, and they're in a new phase in their life right now. They see what the guy next door is doing. Bob Dylan made $400 million.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, people don't, I mean, not that those guys are poor to begin with, but, you know, it's nice to not have to really worry about that. Let somebody else worry about it. You get your cash and move on.
And what's fortunate is Bob had his publishing to be able to sell it in the first place. A lot of people, like you look at the Beatles, the greatest things, as I said earlier.
Yeah, we were talking about that yesterday. Yeah.
Yeah, they never owned their own publishing.
That's terrible.
They were kids and they signed a piece of paper. They thought publishing that, folio books where you see your printed music, that's published. They didn't understand the idea.
A lot of, you know what? And that's actually, it seems like these days we think, oh, everybody knows that. But there's a lot of people that don't really understand that. So.
No. And you have the negotiating power when you begin. If you're a new band now, you really have to have some insight and have a good manager to understand that and know how to do that. And again, if you want to give half your publishing away or all of it because you think that's going to make you a star or whatever, that's your choice.
But you have to understand the ramifications down the road.
Ramifications, yeah. So I think that's what's going on, at least recently, with people selling their catalogs. It's an amazing time. But what happens is you send in these requests, and then usually give it a week or 10 days or so, and then you do follow-ups. Because what happens when you send a request to a publisher or a record company, they then need to go to the songwriter, if that's part of the contract they have with the songwriter or the artist, and tell them about it and get their permission.
Yeah,
And
because also too, in that arena, we've all heard these stories too. But like Paul McCartney didn't want the Beatles songs or his songs used for certain advertising. Led Zeppelin was like that; they didn't want their songs used for
very much so. Neil Young,
also
the Eagles,
right?
All these people you don't see much, and if you do, like I cleared songs with the Doors who never used it. We gave them $500,000 to use "Break On Through" in Monsters Inc. way back in the day. And Pete Townsend, we gave $300,000 for Bob O'Reilly and another thing. So there's a lot of money to be made there. And it was a different use. It was in a film. It wasn't like a commercial in a TV show. Catalogs. We're talking about catalogs.
Right. So they're a whole collection of tunes.
Whole collection of songs. So Neil Young has a catalog. Bob Dylan has a catalog. Then there's like the Motown catalog, which is an amazing catalog of songs, mostly from the 60s and 70s. And I needed to know what was an easier clear. They're called easy clears. And the Motown catalog is a catalog of amazing songs, but it's not so difficult and expensive to get permission and to license those songs. They're part of a pop culture in a certain way, and they are in commercials, and they're just a lot of fun. And
they're just used all the time for movies and films
and commercials and on American Idol or whatever. They stand out. But what I was getting at is that you submit these requests and you give a little time, and then you follow up on this. Now, what happened in the last 10 years or more when I was working there is that hip hop came in. And that's fine, that's great. But what happened there, I would find when I would request a hip hop song, that there could be at least 8 writers on that thing, maybe 10, at least 5 or 6.
And maybe they're using samples, which is a whole other
That's another complication, and I dealt with that too. So what my job, first of all, is to get this list of songs that the producer wants to use in his show or movie, and then I go forth and find out who really correctly controls 100% of these songs. I need to clear it 100%. Because if I clear it 92% and 8% is outstanding, and that one guy steps up and says, "What'd you do that for?" Then I've got a mess.
You got a problem, yeah.
So in a timely manner, I have to find out, first of all, who controls it, and they're called splits. If you have a song and there's 8 writers, then you've got an 8 split on this one song. And those splits.
And would that be like, so people talk about having points. Would that be applicable to the situation? Or?
Yes, that's splits. Let's say there's 4 writers on a song. In country music now, there's at least 3 or 4 writers on a song. There's no more like,
one guy in a room
that wrote it by himself,
Yeah, exactly.
There's at least 3 or 4. It's called committee writing in Nashville, where 4 people sit down and they write a song. And it's amazing how generally you can't tell, like, oh, this guy wrote the bridge and that guy wrote the chorus, because they're really good at making it seamless. But anyway, let's say there's 4 writers on a song and they split it 25% each. That's simple. But sometimes, like in the hip hop world, for example, this guy can have 13.42%. This guy can have 22.34%. This guy's got 10%. This guy's got 4%. And I've got to put this together as a pie and clear it up.
And they all have to be on the same page and agree to it.
And agree with it and agree with the fees, and know that, like, let's say it's $100 for the song. If you own 25%, you're going to get $25. They're going to understand that. They're not going to get $100. They're going to get $25 because they're 1 of 4 writers. They only have 25%.
Right.
So that's part of what happens in music clearance.
And that's a lot of the, I think, too, a lot of the misconceptions, and people, you get into situations where it's like a handshake deal. and then all of a sudden the song becomes a hit, and then you got to sort all that stuff out, right? Because that's where the money is, and hopefully
It's
you've
true.
retained your rights and all that stuff.
Well, what also happened, which was really crazy, is that these producers would hear a new song on the radio and they would love it, and they go, I want the new Drake song, and it just came out last week and we want to use that. So I would go to the publishers, and sometimes they would say to me, well, we really don't know yet what the splits are because these guys are arguing about it over here, or they're trying to figure it out. So,
and meanwhile, you're trying to do business to get it done, right?
You get it done. So we would clear songs sometimes where the split would be pending, and there's a good faith thing there.
Right.
And
so the fee is the fee, and then the publisher distributes however.
It's still the MFN fee. But there were times when there were problems, and this guy wanted more than that guy, and I won't go there too much, but there were some problems sometimes, but generally not. And part of my job in music clearance was to have a gut, intuitive feeling through experience and understanding if something was going to work out or not. Because there were times where I just said, this doesn't feel good. I would say the glass is half full or the glass is half empty. Right. And I would have to tell the producers, and then I would say, I suggest you get another song to fill this spot.
Yeah, I mean, because ultimately too, you're that's not the only project you're working on, right? You got 20 other things going on, and you got to get that done.
I was juggling a lot of things. We had a wonderful computer that was designed for music clearance and licensing.
Awesome.
And that was very helpful. Everything was, it was paperless even. It was all on scanning and barcodes. And
awesome.
The guy, Evan Greenspan, is just brilliant with that. But what was I getting at is that I had to have an intuition to know if it was going to clear. And then what I would try to do is when I call them to give them the bad news, I would try to have a song. This is called music supervision, a backup music supervision. And I would give them a list of ideas that felt the same or maybe lyrically spoke about the same thing and had the same tone and vibe to it. And then I knew that I think it would clear. That was a big part of it. Oh, you're suggesting this, then it better clear. And I had a feeling that it would clear through experiences. We would have in our database, we would say, well, what's the history of this song?
Because you can see that, right?
Yeah. You can see it all laid out there. And this kind of a use, let's say a live competition song, it cleared. Oh, it didn't clear, but why didn't it clear? This kind of thing. So we would get a temperature again, the consensus through the history of that music clearance on that song, and then we could, propose that to be used.
For people that I guess artists or writers out there because I hear a lot of people talking about we're trying to get our songs for TV and radio. We're trying to get them shopped for that. What's your biggest advice as far as what to look out for if they're talking to reps that are trying to do that? What are some big flags?
Well, the flags, it's not so much the flags. I'll talk more about how do you get that done? How do you get your songs in a TV show or in a movie? And I there's a couple of things. You find out who the music supervisor is on that show or that movie, and you find out who the editors are, and you get your songs in those people's hands because they're the ones that are hungry and their job is to find material.
Yeah, they're making the decisions.
They're the gatekeepers. They're making the decisions, and they're also these days music supervisors help clear and license. That's part of their job now. So they know that if you're starting out, that they can make a good deal with you. Sometimes they won't even pay you, they give you a license, but really you get what's called the performance royalties if it's played on TV. That's another part of music business. When a song is played on the radio and a TV show, there's broadcast performance. That's where you get into BMI and ASCAP.
Right.
And that's not a negotiated thing. If you're signed as a songwriter, you can only belong to one PRO, Performing Rights Society, BMI or ASCAP.
So it's either one. Yeah.
Either one. If you're a publisher, you can have a publishing company with both of them because you can then represent writers that are signed to both of those. But anyway, you sign, you decide if you want to be at ASCAP or BMI or CSAC, there's a couple more. And then you're in with them, and then you fill out cue sheets, and they find out that your song is played on a particular show. Based on the ratings of that show is what will help decide how much you get paid. So that's a whole other revenue stream that comes in.
And there's a whole established fee structure for all the BMI, ASCAP.
Right. So what I was getting at is if a band says, no, I don't want to, I mean, okay, you can use my song for free in this TV show, they should know that they'll still get their performances on the back end when that was put in. But what I was getting is part of what I had to do was music cue sheets. Is I would sit down with my headphones on and watch a TV show, and I would do logs. It's called cue sheet logs, and I would have to put the song in there and the writer, and if it's a visual use or a background instrumental, for how long I'd have a stopwatch there, and I would. And it was crazy, and sit there and go stop, go, and look at it again. And what the heck song was that again? I think it's on the list.
But that's an important part of the business to get paid, right?
Oh yeah. And then sometimes I would find a song that I didn't clear because the producer didn't tell me. They just put it in there. Like, what'd you do that for? Okay, I better go clear it. Sometimes, the publisher would call, hey, I heard my song last night on TV and you didn't get permission. Oh, excuse me. And you go, get it fixed,
Right.
But what happens with these cue sheets, you take them down and you also give a scene description of what's going on, and then you submit it to the client and to BMI and ASCAP on behalf of the publishers and the writers.
Yeah, because if you don't do all those steps, people don't get paid, right?
Right, and then sometimes you would have a structured timing on these requests I would send in, where like up to 30 seconds would be $1,000. Up to 1 minute and 30 seconds would be $1,500. So when I did these cue sheets, if it went over, let's say that 1 minute and 30, and that we didn't clear it for up to 2 minutes, then the publisher go, well, that's not the deal we made, or the record company. So we would then have to go back and restructure, negotiate this thing. So that was always a bit of a mess.
Yeah.
So then go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was saying after you clear it and it airs, then you do what's called the licensing. And after the music cue sheet, I do that. We would request the license from the publisher or the record company, or we would issue the license to the label or the record company. Some of the smaller people that represent themselves, they don't have the paperwork and the licenses, so we would issue that to them.
Sure.
So then there's a process of licensing. And that's a back and forth thing where we request a license and they send it to us, and we send it to the artist or publisher, whatever the next step would be, and they would send it back to us. And what we would do in our company, EMG, is we would gather the funds from the producers and hold on to the funds. So as part of the licensing, we didn't have to go back to the client every time a license came in or whatever. We had it ready to go. It was part of our service to send the funds with the license back to the publisher and the record company. And the publishers and record companies appreciate that, because then they don't have to go chasing down for it.
Because everybody's like that. The thing about that is, especially when you start talking about Academy Awards and those kind of shows, I mean, what a big job having to chase all the money and having to do all that kind of thing. What's some of your favorite memories of working in the business? Like, what are a couple of things that really stand out? Artists that you've met, or just funny stories.
Well, I would go to parties in Hollywood. I mean, I lived up in the Whiskey Go-Go on Sunset Boulevard for a year. So I was there in that whole punk rock and new wave and rock hair band thing. And I had a lot of fun. And I was playing in clubs, not too much. When I was younger, I made a decision to have a job, and I had a family, and I raised my kids. And I didn't want to be the starving musician guy, I guess, so I was afraid of that. So
it's fun when it's just you, but when you got kids and
it's different. But what I was fortunate is I was in the industry I loved, and I learned about it. I was able to function. I was kind of always an artist at heart. So along the way, I would continue to play and write songs and do that because I just needed to. So when I left Las Vegas and I went to Hollywood, Bruce Springsteen really is the guy that flipped my songwriting switch. And I really like the idea of an American guy with a guitar and a song to sing.
Yeah,
To me,
it's romantic, right?
It's romantic. It's the new Woody Guthrie,
Right.
Bob Dylan guy.
Sure.
And he was very passionate. And I happened to be 19 and very young when Born to Run came out.
Oh, okay.
And all of a sudden he's on the cover of Newsweek and Time as the future rock and roll. And then he came to the Roxy when I was a kid, and that was when Born to Run was number one.
Wow.
I was in the front row there, and he came out.
What a great place to see him.
I was right up front. He actually came out and said, "Hey, kid, would you hold the words to this song?" So I'm sitting there. It was on a KMET radio broadcast, and it was a Carole King song that the Byrds had recorded called "Going Back."
Yeah.
And he's reading these words and singing. I'm right there. And then afterward, he said, "Let's have a hand for the man that holds the words." And
That's funny.
It was just great. So then, I started writing songs and a lot and doing that. So some of my favorite memories is there's a lot of them, and I just like that I was in Hollywood in the music business, and I didn't get in trouble, and I didn't get messed up on drugs.
Right.
And
because that time period, a lot of guys did, right?
Cocaine Bill, all of that stuff with Quaaludes and stuff, but I wasn't motivated that way. I give my mother.
Yeah, you had to show up at your office job and do that.
I did.
Straight.
Very responsible. The Disney, when I went to work for Disney, Mickey Mouse was a taskmaster.
That's it's funny you mentioned that, because I have a lot of friends that have worked for Disney over the years. And while that is a great job, that's a pretty demanding job, right? Very
demanding. And the work ethic, it's just understood you work real hard. But it was so magical because I was there. I started in '88 when The Little Mermaid just came out.
Wow.
And that's when Disney turned around with that live animated stuff, animation. That's the Alan Menken songs and the Beauty and the Beast and Aladdin and all of that.
Huge
So it was
song.
a magical time when we were winning the Academy Awards for the Best Song of the Year, Lion King with Elton John.
Yeah, and you were all part of that, right? Because a lot of that was with the marketing.
Because I was in marketing, and what was nice is this. What's the word they use? Is synergy, and the synergy that all the different departments, home video and international, and the theme parks and the networks and all of these people that were firing on all these different cylinders, where I was starting at the basics there, that I had to know what we had the rights to work with and provide the stuff to these different departments. So very magical. My kids went to the daycare center across the street right there.
Wow.
Disney daycare. You would figure they'd do a good job.
Where was that your office at? Was that in Hollywood?
It's on Buena Vista in Burbank. Right there on the studio
just
lot
over the hill, right?
Where Walt Disney used to be. And it was kind of like a college dorm area. It was beautiful. There was squirrels and birds and grass, and it was really a nice environment to work on. Very creative.
Yeah. One of the things, actually going back to your Vegas days, so you mentioned, we talked a little bit about, you met some interesting people, along the way, and one of them was Elvis. Tell us the Elvis story.
I did meet Elvis. Yeah, when I went to Pepperdine in Malibu, I went to school with a guy named Gene Porter, and his father, Bill Porter, was Elvis's sound engineer.
Interesting.
Bill started back in Nashville with Chet Atkins at RCA, and he helped engineer great songs like Oh Pretty Woman and Everly Brothers. And so he moved to Vegas, and Gene grew up in Vegas, and we went to Pepperdine. So happened that I used to mow lawns and go see Elvis anyway because I loved him when I was a kid. And I used to sneak up at the International Hotel.
Which is where Elvis used to play in Vegas.
Where he used to play, and I would sit there in the balcony and watch him rehearse the band. I just always loved Elvis. And my peers thought he was like corny, like, Dean Martin or something. And Dean, he's great too. But I loved Elvis. So it turned out on my 19th birthday, which was Easter morning. So that would have been March 30th, 1976. I got to see Elvis at the Late Show, and we went upstairs after the Late Show in his dressing room. And it was Easter morning, and I remembered these girls are sitting around, and these guys are sitting around. Billy Swan was there, who wrote I Can Help, and this was at the time. And Elvis came out, and he had this beautiful robe on that said EP, on it in gold. And I was standing with Bill and his son Gene, and Elvis came over to us, and I shook his hand and I basically said, "Happy Easter, Elvis," and he said, "Happy Easter, son." And then I listened to him speak to Bill Porter about the show that we had just watched.
Right.
And I really recognized when I used to watch Elvis rehearse and when I heard him speaking to Bill, how astute he was about sound and how he cared about the show.
Right.
And he had very particular ideas about how he wanted things to be. When I would watch him rehearse, he would break down and say to the singers, the Sweet Inspirations, do this, or to the drummer, Ronnie Tutt, do that.
Yeah.
There was nobody else up there telling him what to do. It was his show, and he and James Burton put that band together, and he was very much in control.
Yeah, and just great musicians, anyways, right? He had those. I know he loved those guys.
He had 2 different choirs, and he had an orchestra and an 8-piece band, the TCB band. They were just explosive. It was great. Yeah. And then another memory growing up here is that I did get to meet John Lennon, and this was when he was on his what's called a Lost Weekend, when he was separated from Yoko, and he was with May Pang and living in Los Angeles. And he was hanging out with Harry Nilsson and Alice Cooper and Ringo and people. And
that's interesting.
Alice Cooper.
John Lennon and Alice Cooper, though. That's an interesting combination.
They called themselves the Hollywood Vampires at the time. And that was years ago. But recently, Alice redid that name. And he's been playing lately with Johnny Depp and stuff.
Right, yeah.
But anyway, Alice was a big golfer, and he knew my mother and her boyfriend, Tony. So Alice called Tony and said, "Hey, John Lennon wants to come to Vegas. Will you take care of him?" Uh-huh. So he stayed at the Riviera, and Tony, I'm grateful he had the mind to invite me to come out to the airport. He said, "You want to go out and pick up John Lennon at the airport?" So I remember.
You're like, "Yes.
Yeah, I'll do that. I'll do that."
Let me check my schedule.
Yeah, I'll skip school, whatever.
Yeah, exactly.
So we went out there, and I just remember getting in a little car with those guys and going up into the terminal. And I tell the story, and it's a personal story, but I was walking down the way with John, just the 2 of us. And, I'm an 18-year-old. This is before I met Elvis, 18 years old. And
18 years old and a huge Beatles fan.
And so I turned to John because I said, I got to say something to this guy besides, "Hey, you're great." I said, "Hey, because John didn't have a father either, as we all know, and I didn't. So I turned to John and said, "Hey, you've always been like my father, because I didn't have one either." And, he put his arm around me and he said, "Well, son, what do you want to know?" And we both had that moment where we looked at each other and said, yeah, that's what that's like. So,
well, the thing about that with those guys, I mean, even like, the celebrity thing in general, and I've been fortunate to work with a lot of people like you have, and people always come at them a certain way. They always come at oh, you're a star and you're so famous. But like when you make the effort to connect personally, they usually appreciate that, right? Not all the time, but usually.
I don't know why I had the guts to do it, but it was a primal thing because it was true. And I just kind of said it, and grabbed the moment, and he appreciated that. So then we went back to the Riviera Hotel, and I went up in his room, and he was talking with May Pang in the other room, and I was hanging out with Harry Nilsson. And then basically John came out. I don't blame him. He said, "Okay, it's time to go." He basically threw me out of the room.
Oh, that's funny.
And that was my story there.
Yeah. Cool. So let's talk about one of the really interesting things with you, and I just recently found this out, is that you actually were pretty much personally involved in getting Buddy Holly his star on the Walk of Fame in Hollywood. Tell us that story. It's a really interesting story about also you're friends with Buddy's widow, Maria.
I spoke with her right before I spoke with you because today's her birthday. So she lives in Texas, and I called and sang her happy birthday.
Yeah.
She's great. So in talking about Buddy Holly and getting the star, I'll tell you about that and what the process is of getting a Hollywood star.
How did you guys first? Yeah, tell us. Let's go back to how you first met Maria and all that.
Well, I would say it was in 2009, and the 50th anniversary of the day the music died.
Right, the plane crash.
The plane crash. The 50th anniversary was coming up, and I worked in the music business, and I dealt with the lady at Paul McCartney's office who dealt with Maria Elena and knew Maria Elena very much.
Because he
So
actually, and just to mention, so and I didn't know this either. You told me this, that Paul McCartney actually had owned the rights to the Buddy Holly catalog.
He controls there's a couple publishers involved. There's Universal and Paul McCartney, depending on the songs and the two territories. So I would start talking to this lady that worked at Paul's office, who was friendly with Maria Elena, Buddy's widow, about this idea I had about getting the apartment tapes released. You know the Buddy Holly story. 2 months before he died, he went into his New York apartment and on a reel-to-reel recorded his last songs. And it's just him and a guitar.
Right.
I call it the heart of the artichoke, the Holy Grail. It's really magical, just vocal guitar performance that were really well done. Wow. And after he died, they put the Fireballs matching tracks to him, and they just weren't as good. So my goal was to get these apartment tapes released because they still weren't released, and I wanted to time that for the 50th anniversary. Right. So the lady at McCartney's office said, "You got to get a hold of Maria Elena because it's all up to her. She has these tapes." So I spoke with Maria Elena about this idea, and then I did what's called a pilgrimage in 2009. I landed in Albuquerque, and I went to the studio where Norman Petty recorded Buddy's songs, and saw that and took a tour. Then I went into Lubbock, Texas, and went all around Lubbock where Buddy was born and raised and grew up.
Yeah, and then because you're also a huge Buddy Holly fan, besides just the business end of it. Right?
And it gets back to the Beatles. You know, if you know the Beatles and love the Beatles, what you tend to do is find out where that came from. And then you research that and you go and find out about Elvis and Carl Perkins and Buddy Holly and the Everly Brothers and these people that were the roots of the Beatles. So what I did is I went down to Dallas and I met Maria Elena, and we got along great. And then she came out to Los Angeles, and I would chaperone her around. We went to the record company, and we managed to get these apartment tapes released for the 50th anniversary, which was cool. And you guys should look into listening to these Buddy Holly apartment tapes.
Because I actually had never heard about that, so now I'm curious.
Peggy Sue got married, and Crying, Waiting, Hoping, and Learning the Game, and just him and a guitar. It's just stripped down. It's like Buddy unplugged. Yeah. So then after we did that, I noted that in the first class of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which was in 1986, there were 10 inductees. And Buddy was the only one that did not have a Hollywood star. Oh. I'm like, well, what's up with that? You know? So I made it a mission to take care of this. So I asked for Maria Elena's permission, and she says, well, that's a good idea. People have been talking to me about that for years, but good luck.
Yeah, because it's complicated, right? It's expensive too.
It takes a lot of, it took vision and passion and due diligence and an understanding. But since I was in the music business, I was able to get it done. And so I went to the Chamber of Commerce and found out what I needed to do. And I became what's called a petitioner. So I was petitioning to get the star for Buddy Holly. So part of it was to come up with people that supported this idea. So I managed to get Yoko Ono and Priscilla Presley and people that were part of, I knew that John loved Buddy and Elvis was friends and loved Buddy. I found people that would understand. So they wrote these great letters of endorsement, you know.
That's amazing.
And then I had to put this book together. And then I had to get the fees together. At the time, it's more now, but at the time it was $25,000.
Yeah, and people don't realize that you have to actually. There's a whole thing, like you said, going through it.
It's not an awards like. I mean, it's an honor. But Maria Elena said, well, I'm not going to pay for it. That's tacky. So you go find out. So what I did is I went to Paul McCartney's office, and I went to Peer Music, which is another publisher of ours, and the Universal Records, who is a record company for his records, and I got them to split it in thirds. Wow. So, $8,333 isn't very much money to get this done. So we got that together. And then I got the approval on June 12th, 2010. And I'm like, this is great. It worked out because they only choose one posthumous person per year. So I was up in a lot of competition, only one person that's not with us anymore. but I made it real clear that this is the time for Buddy.
Yeah, the timing
So
was
once
right.
once I got the approval, I said, okay, let's do this on his 75th birthday, which was the following September in 2011. So we waited almost a year and a half because I knew that America's about anniversaries and 50th and 75.
Yeah, that all kind of made sense, right?
Bigger bang. Time flies anyway. So what I did is we got that set for his birthday, and then I went over and found the actual spot where I wanted the star to be, because I had an idea. I wanted to be next to the Beatles because Buddy's the roots of the Beatles.
Yeah,
and it was so beautiful. So I went over there, and there was just two spots. You got John, George, Ringo. Then there was a blank spot, and then there's another spot. So I took a picture and I sent it to the Chamber of Commerce. This is exactly where I want it, and we're going to have it on this date, the 75th birthday. So we got that approved. And what's nice is after Buddy's star was put there, I arranged for it to be right next to where Paul McCartney's would be one day. And they've been trying to get Paul to get a star for 20 years. And he was busy and all that. He wasn't interested, whatever it was. But 6 months after Buddy was there, Paul showed up and got his right next to the rest of the Beatles, awesome. And next to Buddy. I know, it's so great.
That's so cool.
Yeah. So that's part of the process is, being a petitioner and getting it done and when and where and how. And then I had to get the guest speakers because you have a ceremony. So to me, it was obvious. I got Phil Everly, who was a friend of Buddy from the Everly Brothers. Was friends with Buddy. He was a speaker. And then Gary Busey, who played Buddy in a great movie.
And that, you know what, we were just talking about that before we went on air, but I mean, that's one of my favorite documentary films. I mean, that's actually one of the, of those genres, that's one of the first ones that was really hugely successful.
It was one of the first. It came out in 1978, and it really helped bring Buddy's career back, along with American Pie, which was 50 years ago in 1970.
Yeah, and that was in the American Graffiti era. All that stuff was hitting, right? Yeah.
So those two things. I think the Buddy Holly story is a good pop film, and it was good for his exposure of his songs. But the truth is, the Buddy Holly story is much more involved, much more interesting, much more depth.
Yeah, that was a homogenized version.
Very homogenized, and a lot of the characters weren't even correct, but they got that done. So anyway, we got Gary to be a speaker, and then Peter Asher, who's a big producer, that produced Linda Ronstadt and James Taylor singing Buddy's songs, like That'll Be the Day. And so they were the speakers, and we had a big party at the big tower, because if anybody wants to see the star, it's right in front of the Capitol Tower.
Capitol Records.
And it says Capitol Records Tower on Vine Street. And at the time, the record company was going, well, we don't want Buddy in front of Capitol Records because he's a universal artist.
That's
so
true.
They said, go across the street and see if there's an opening spot there. And I went over there and I saw Chuck Berry and different people, but there was no spots. So I went back to Universal.
Yeah, you want to be, I think the Beatles is a good location.
That's why I said, hey, he's going to be next to the Beatles. And they said, okay. And
that kind of overrides it. That's such a, and I know that was not an easy process. And then you've remained close friends with Maria Elena.
Yeah, I spoke to her today because it's her birthday. And the thing about Buddy Holly, I just want to take 2 minutes to say about Buddy Holly is that Buddy arrived at a real interesting time in American music because he grew up in Texas, and his heroes were Bill Monroe and Hank Williams and Bob Wills. And he played music growing up, banjo and mandolin and guitar. He had a duel with a guy named Bob Montgomery, who became a big music publisher in Nashville. But then what happened in 1954 is that the big locomotion came through town, and that was Elvis. And when Elvis came through town and Buddy saw that,
it kind of switched gears.
I'm going there. So the thing that Buddy had was the ability to write great songs. Buddy was a songwriter. Elvis was not. And Buddy was a great musician, a great guitar player. So what happened with Buddy Holly is that he created the first 2 guitar, bass, and drums, self-contained rock and roll band that wrote their own songs and sang them and went into the studio and made the records. And when that band went out on the road, they sounded like the record.
Right, because up until that time, that was not the deal, right?
No, Little Richard and Jerry Lee Lewis and Chuck Berry and the Everly Brothers, they had pickup people and musicians that they would play and then they would go their own way. So Buddy had the first self-contained band. The first album, the Chirping Crickets, that came out in 57, was the first album with a rock and roll band on it. And you can see 4 guys. And on the cover of that album was a Stratocaster guitar. And people are like, what is that? So Buddy went over to England for a whole month in March of 58, for a month, and played over 50 gigs all around that area. And he was on a show that was the equivalent of the Ed Sullivan Show. It was live Sunday night at the Palladium in London, and he played that Stratocaster guitar.
And that changed the world. Yep.
Well, that's the first time Keith Richards and Eric Clapton and Jeff Beck and his people saw that Stratocaster guitar.
Yeah.
And Buddy played with the capo on That'll Be the Day, and they're like, what is that? And, John and Paul and these people. So Buddy was really a very important part of the concept of writing your own song.
And that's a story. I mean, his story, that's a part that we don't know. Most people don't know that, right?
It's a long time ago, but, really it's not. It was only 60-something years ago.
Yeah.
But he was a songwriter. And the thing with Buddy is he had an ability to write pop melodies, coming with a country groove and a pop sensibility. I call him like the pop Hank Williams.
Right.
And his songs were very simple, 3/4 chords. So if you played guitar in the beginning and you learn, Peggy Sue. It's so
another part about that, guys like that, is that the average person can play those songs.
That's right.
And that's just like the Beatles.
Well, their first songs were that Love Me Do. Their first big hit was basically a Buddy Holly song. And they learned how to write songs and structures and what chords work and what keys. And then, of course, they expanded, which Buddy would have done too.
Yeah.
But the scratch, the itch, the desire, the passion to do this came from Buddy Holly when they saw him doing that. And they realized that we got to write our own songs. We can't just do covers. We'll run out of material. So that's the thing. And John and Paul were very wonderful artists together and apart too,
Well, that's awesome that Paul too, they were willing to step up and help pay for that star. And that just is sort of a testament, just a big part of the influence. And those guys, I mean, like you said, it was a long time ago, I guess, and in a way, but in a way it wasn't. And those guys still to this day, I mean, Buddy Holly, all those original, Carl Perkins that we were just talking about. I played with Carl down in Memphis at the Peabody.
Did you? You did?
Yeah.
Oh, that's great.
Long time ago.
Carl too.
He's that was the sweetest guy.
I was there when he got his hands on the in front of the Guitar Center in Los Angeles.
Oh,
and it was great. Brian Setzer was there and Tom Petty was there.
Yeah, I met all those guys at Sound City in the 80s. Petty, the
rockabilly guys and the rock and rollers. And there was a moment where Carl was just by himself at the Guitar Center, playing the guitar, singing to himself the song called Movie Mad, which is his first composition. And then I went out and said hi to him. He was talking to somebody, and they were talking about Jesus.
Yeah,
and Jesus Christ. It was wonderful. Really sweet guy.
Yeah, he was the nicest man. He had his sons playing with him too.
Stan, right, yeah.
Yeah, they were all
cool. You played.
They were all characters, man.
They are.
I knew Little Richard. I knew all the old. I started doing the oldie stuff first before I ever did anything else. So I used to play with Danny Flores, the guy that did the song Tequila. The Champs.
Sure.
And I was doing that when I was 18, and we met everybody you can think of because Danny knew all those guys.
That's cool.
And to wrap everything up, what's your advice in terms of just the music business, the music licensing, clearance stuff? What's just some things that you would like to give information on to younger people that are coming up and that kind of thing?
Well, I think it gets back to doing the work. And if you're a songwriter, you start out, it's a good idea to learn other people's songs and to understand how songs are structured, be it Buddy Holly or Bruce Springsteen or Tom Petty or Taylor Swift, whatever, and digest that and understand how things work structurally and chord-wise, and how to I think good songs, personally, they have what's called tension and release. Usually the verse has some tension and then it pops into a chorus that has a release and it gives you something. You want to create something, I believe, that gives to the listener. So you want to think about what you want to say and how you want to say it. And it's a beautiful thing because everybody is an individual. They all have their own fingerprints and DNA. And as a songwriter, you start with your influences and then you got to find your voice, your style, your thing. And get into that and focus on that and do it for the love of it. And then you work on getting a catalog together and you got to find somebody that believes in you and gets it. And there could be 10 people in a room, and 9 of them say, I don't like it, I don't get it, give up, don't quit your day job or whatever they're going to say. And then one guy says, hey, come here. I know what you're trying to do. Let me hear some more of that.
Right.
So you need to find somebody that gets it and believes in it and that has some ability to represent you. Because if you have somebody in the corner, if it's a manager or a publisher, they can make a difference in your life. And just, do the work, perform, play. Now, you can be a musician. That's great. My thing is songs. I like songs more than music. Now, there's music in songs, but I like the thing about a melody and a lyric, marriage together and telling a little story.
Yeah, because that's so powerful when that's all clicking, right?
3 minutes, and you can do it by yourself. Movies and plays and stuff, a lot of people are involved, You can whittle it down, and if you want to write it with 3 other people or whatever. But I think it's a good idea to start writing them by yourself and get the ability to know how to write a bridge and a chorus and a verse and put together.
Yeah, just the basic mechanics, I think.
The mechanics of it. And so if you're in a room with somebody else, 2 or 3 other people, and they need a bridge, you go, well, I don't know. Yeah, how about this? You have experience. So I always say you show up and do the work and work on your thing and find out what you want to say and how you want to say it in your style, and go forth from there, because it all starts with the song.
Yeah, and I mean, it's finding your own voice and connecting, right? I mean, it's all about the connection with the audience. And
I've got this thing called the 4 C's: create, connect, contribute, collect. Now, you got to create it. For me, I understood the second one is the most difficult, and that's connecting. And once you connect, you contribute, and then something comes back to you. You don't know in what way or how much or even why sometimes, except you did the work.
Yeah. And most people, most songwriters, they write because they love it. They don't think they're going to get rich, right?
You do it because you love it. But you would like people to hear it and connect with it. Like when I play live now, I'll do, 4 hours and maybe sing 60 songs, and maybe 5 of them will be my own. Because I know people want to hear what they know. But it's always nice when you do one of your own, and as you're doing it, you look out and see people move into it or
tapping their
kind
foot.
of sing, and then if they like it afterward, then you're not crazy, maybe.
It was all worth it in some way.
Yeah, that's right. You got to get it. You do it in your bedroom, then you got to get out of your bedroom.
That's it.
And get it out there. You
got to be brave and put yourself out there.
I think it was Bob Dylan who said a song isn't a song until somebody else hears it. So you got to get out there and do it.
Yeah, there's some truth in that. I think how's the best way for people to find you online? Because I know you have a lot of your social pages. What's the best way? And we're actually going to put links just so people know in the podcast description.
Sure. Just my email address works for me. Kevin Magowan, my name, at AOL.com.
Yeah, and you're on Facebook and all that.
I am on Facebook, and I have a web page, but it's down at the moment. I got to get that back up. But yes, I'm on Facebook, and then my email, and I'll respond. If you have any thoughts or questions.
Yeah, because I think it's what's awesome, Kevin, is we've talked, and you perform quite a bit at the Pioneer Saloon, a place that I work with as social media guy. And what's great about you is you have so much knowledge. And that's that whole area of the music licensing, clearance, all that kind of thing. There's so much misconceptions and people just don't really know about that stuff. So I think, and that we can actually even do another one of these down the road, and we'll even hyper focus on one aspect of it. But because there's so much we can really talk about. But I thank you so much for your time, and you have so many great
Thank you, Darrell.
stories.
It's a great, and all the best to everybody out there, and write on and write your songs. And that's one thing to write them. But if you're a performer too, and you get out and play your songs that you create, that's also a way to present your material.
Yeah, and protect your rights.
Protect your rights. Always protect your rights, and know that you have the starting gate to negotiate. You have the power in the beginning when you have the song.
Yeah,
you got to write the song. So have fun getting that done.
Yeah, exactly. It's a process. All right. Thank you so much, Kevin. I appreciate it.
Happy New Year, Darrell. We'll be in touch. Okay.
Hey, you too, man.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Bye. Bye-bye.